Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to Webinar 3 in the Financial Abuse Awareness Series. My name is Bill Mitchell. This series is part of the Financial Protections Project, co-designed by the Queensland Government, Caxton Legal Centre and Townsville Community Law. The series is an online continuing professional development program that aims to raise financial industry awareness about the financial abuse of older persons. Before we begin, we acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. This presentation is about ethics and standards. The slides are not read verbatim, but they are paraphrased for emphasis. They are designed to be downloaded as standalone readable modules and contain references for deeper learning. So let's begin. Before we begin, let's reflect on this statement from Rees. Lawyers' ethical obligations require that they understand risk factors for and warning signs of abuse and are able to ask appropriate questions to probe for these issues and can advise older clients on preventative strategies to protect themselves from abuse and provide clients with information and supports to make decisions based on their interests and values. Reflect on your own work and think about a number of things. What is your contact with older persons as clients? What is your current knowledge base about financial abuse? And what are your current skills in dealing with cases of financial abuse? This is the only module within the ethics and standard component of the training program. It contains information on ethical frameworks for accountants, financial advisors and financial counsellors, particularly the ones that are relevant to the issue of financial abuse. This module also includes information on how the training program's desired outcomes are informed by and relate to ethics and standards frameworks. This module also considers advisors' ethical obligations to engage in CPD. We've identified the relevant ethical values and standards, and they vary depending on your industry, professional and organisational context. The nature and scope of your ethical values, principles and standards differs depending on your occupation, your professional membership, training or affiliation, and on the regulatory environment, or even a combination of these factors. We've listed some of the standards that might apply to the people who are participating in this program. If you're an advisor that isn't within one of these established ethical or standards frameworks, there may be other guiding statements such as codes of conduct or best practices that should be observed. Here's some industry examples of ethical values, and it shows you how each of the core values relate within the different frameworks. Think about how they compare with each other. How do they relate to dealing with older persons? And how do they relate to the issue of elder abuse and more specifically, financial abuse? This training program is not a substitute for industry training around specific ethical standards and frameworks. It seeks to complement ongoing CPD undertaken by advisors. Specific standards, such as the Financial Planners and Advisors Code of Ethics, contain much more detailed individual standards that do relate to aspects of this training program. Wherever possible, we've tried to use references to industry standards to allow deeper and further self-directed learning. On the right-hand side, you can see the standards that we've had reference to. The training program is based in continuing professional development, also called continuing professional education. The training program is a means of fulfilling those ethical values by assisting you to satisfy your CPD requirements and at the same time build knowledge and skills against the backdrop of your ethical frameworks. While all advisors have their own sets of standards, there are some central requirements that are reflected in the program, including knowledge, skills, ethics and standards. Giving you some examples of the sorts of CPD categories that the different frameworks use across 4 areas: knowledge, skills, standards and ethics. And you can see that there's an alignment between those categories. The categories that are the CPD categories themselves and the training programs categories. I've only used the FASEA as an example in this graphic. It's really important that you understand that the program has a focus on making sure that advisors stop being part of the problem of financial abuse. That they understand specific risks and vulnerabilities within their industry that they can avoid, and if they don't avoid, will lead to or cause financial abuse. And that could be an example of avoiding involvement in causes or cases or being complicit in financial abuse. We give some industry examples of how you can stop being part of the problem, and that includes relevant industry guidelines, best practice approaches, peer observations, and applied learning. And really, we want you to start being part of the solution. We want you to understand financial abuse, how to recognise it, prevent it from happening, and respond if it's already happening. Here's an industry example from CPA Australia that sets out the ethical accountability of the accounting profession. Take a moment to read that slide. It gives a specific example of mistreatment of older people, financial or otherwise, as being unacceptable and possibly illegal. It also talks about the duty of care owed by accountants where they have a suspected case of financial abuse and the steps that need to be taken. They can't simply turn a blind eye. They need to do everything that can reasonably be done to prevent or detect abuse. It goes on to talk about the accountant's professional and ethical training, and that they should be in a position to notice and understand the implications of actions that can lead to elder financial abuse. It's not the total professional responsibility of an accountant to deal with elder abuse cases that they face. They need to work in tandem with their colleagues and other professionals to get advice. CPA Australia has excellent information on their website about dealing with elder abuse, and particularly financial abuse for accountants. There's lots of links throughout this program to the CPA's work in this regard. Here's an example from the Australian Financial Complaints Authority, which considers good industry practice when faced with financial abuse. And the policy includes a three-step approach. Were there warning signs known as red flags? Did the financial service provider exercise its duty to take reasonable care and skill? And if so, should they have delayed the transaction or taken preventative action? AFCA's approach to financial abuse really sums up the approach we want advisors to take. It's about understanding the warning signs, understanding the context of your duty or your work or occupational care, and what steps you need to take to prevent the abuse from happening or to intervene if it's already happening. We use examples of AFCA's determinations throughout this program. Before we leave this slide and this module, I want you to think about those ethical standards, your own professional ethical standards. You might need to refamiliarise yourself with those standards and think about how they relate to financial abuse. Do they mention elder abuse or financial abuse? Do they impose obligations on you to recognise and act? Do they also reflect external obligations, for example, the statutory requirements under legislation, whether it be the corporations law or credit and consumer laws? Are there examples of where ethical disciplinary processes might apply because a professional failed to act? Are there examples of civil liability that might apply where a professional failed to act? And are there examples of good industry practice for advisors that set out the expectations or obligations? Thanks for listening to this webinar series. Feel free to download the PDF for future reference. The next module is the first of the knowledge modules, the introduction. Thanks for listening.